The dust devil that changed everything swept across the Montana plains on a Tuesday morning when most folks were still nursing their coffee. By the time it passed, Jacob Thornfield would discover something in that swirling wall of dirt and debris that would turn his failing ranch and his entire life upside down. What he found wasn't cattle, wasn't equipment, and wasn't anything he could have prepared for. It was a woman, blind and unconscious, wearing a wedding dress that had seen better days, with no memory of how she'd gotten there and no one looking. For her, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn silence at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Jacob Thornfield had set it to ring. He'd been awake anyway, staring at the water stain on his bedroom ceiling that had grown larger after last week's storm. The stain looked different in the grey light filtering through his torn curtains, more like a map of somewhere he'd never been, somewhere that probably had better luck than the Broken Arrow Ranch. Jacob swung his legs over the side of the narrow bed, his joints protesting with the familiar symphony of aches that came from 26 years of hard living and harder choices. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he shuffled to the kitchen, where the coffee maker sat silent and cold. He'd disconnected it 3 days ago when the electric bill arrived with numbers that made his stomach turn. Instead, he filled an old pot with water from the well pump. At least that still worked, and set it on the propane burner. While waiting for it to boil, he counted the bills spread across his kitchen table like a losing poker hand. Mortgage payment overdue by 2 months. Feed store account in collections. Property taxes that would come due in 6 weeks with nothing to pay them. The Broken Arrow had been in the Thornfield family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built the main house with his own hands in 1952, every board and nail a testament to stubborn determination. His father had expanded the operation, adding the horse barn and the guest cabin that now sat empty except for mice and memories. Jacob had inherited the ranch at 21 when a drunk driver took both parents on a rainy night outside Billings. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of watching everything his family had built slowly crumble while he fights to keep it together with baling wire, prayer, and an increasingly empty bank account. The coffee, if you could call the weak brown liquid coffee, tasted like defeat with a hint of chicory. Jacob drank it anyway, standing at his kitchen window and watching the eastern horizon, where the sun would soon paint the sky in shades of promise the day wouldn't keep. His cattle dotted the nearest pasture, 43 head of mixed breeds that should have been 60 by now if he could afford proper breeding stock. The fence line sagged in places where he'd patched it with whatever scraps he could find. The automatic waterer had been broken for 2 months, forcing him to haul water in the back of his pickup twice a day. The truck itself was held together by stubbornness and duct tape. A 1998 Ford with 247,000 miles and a transmission that slipped. In 3rd gear, the air conditioning had died during the summer heat wave, and the radio picked up nothing but static unless he held the antenna just right while driving over the hill near the creek. Jacob finished his coffee and pulled on his work boots, noting the new hole near the left toe that would need attention soon. His reflection in the hallway mirror showed a man older than his 26 years, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sky. His brown hair needed cutting, and his jaw carried 3 days of stubble because razor blades cost money he didn't have. Outside, the morning air held the crisp promise of October in Big Sky country. The thermometer on the porch read 38 degrees, cold enough to make his breath visible, but not cold enough to freeze the water troughs. Yet, he started his rounds at the chicken coop, where 12 hens provided the only reliable income. The ranch generated. Their eggs sold for $4 a dozen at Morrison's general store in town, barely enough to keep feed in their bellies and his own. The rooster, A mean-spirited Rhode Island Red named Caesar eyed him with suspicious calculation as he gathered the eggs. "Don't look at me like that," Jacob muttered, collecting 7 eggs from the nesting boxes. "I'm not any happier about this arrangement than you are." Caesar ruffled his feathers and strutted away, apparently unconvinced. The cattle came next, scattered across 20 acres of grassland that had once supported twice their number. Jacob walked the fence line, checking for breaks and loose posts. The morning ritual gave him time to think, and thinking was both a blessing and curse. He'd tried everything to save the ranch, sold his father's antique tractor collection, took a part-time job at the grain elevator in town until they laid him off during the slow season. Applied for agricultural loans that required collateral he didn't have and credit scores he couldn't reach. Even considered selling parcels of land until he learned the property taxes were structured in a way that made partial sales financially impossible. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was land-rich and cash-poor, surrounded by thousands of acres, worth a fortune if sold whole, but worthless for solving his immediate problems. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. Jacob envied its freedom, its ability to soar above problems and see the bigger picture. From up there, the Broken Arrow probably looked like any other ranch. Fence lines and pastures, buildings and roads laid out in the geometric patterns of human ambition. From ground level, it looked like a losing battle fought one day at a time. The wind picked up as he completed his circuit, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of weather. The sky held that particular quality of light that old-timers said meant change was coming. Jacob had learned to read the signs, the way the cattle bunched together, how the barn cats sought shelter, the restless energy that seemed to hum through the air itself. By 10 o'clock, the wind had strengthened to a steady blow that rattled the loose boards on the equipment shed. Jacob spent an hour reinforcing the chicken coop and securing anything that might take flight. The weather radio in the kitchen crackled with static-filled warnings about dust storm conditions developing across the eastern plains. He'd seen dust storms before. Montana wasn't typically Dust Bowl country, but drought years and poor farming practices upwind could create walls of dirt that turned day to night and stripped paint from vehicles. The smart thing was to stay inside, close all windows, and wait for it to pass. But cattle couldn't stay inside, and 43 head represented everything Jacob had left in the world. He spent the next hour moving the herd to the sheltered valley, behind the main house, where a line of cottonwoods and the natural curve of the land provided some protection. The cattle sensed the approaching storm and moved with unusual cooperation, their instincts sharper than any weather forecast. The sky had turned an ominous yellow-brown by noon, and the wind carried the taste of distant soil. Jacob made a final check of the outbuildings, ensuring doors were latched and windows secured. The horses, 3 aging quarter horses that ate more than they were worth but had been his father's pride, huddled in the barn with their heads low and ears back. The dust storm hit at 12:43 p.m. Jacob was in the kitchen when the wall of dirt engulfed the ranch. One moment he could see the barn 50 yards away, the next he couldn't see past the porch railing. The world disappeared in a rolling tsunami of sand and debris that blocked out the sun and turned the air thick as chocolate milk. The house shuddered under the assault. Dust found its way through cracks he didn't know existed, settling on every surface and turning the air gritty. Jacob wet a bandana and tied it over his nose and mouth, breathing through the makeshift filter while he waited. Dust storms were like tornadoes. You couldn't predict exactly how long they'd last or which direction they'd go. This one felt different, though bigger, more persistent, the kind that made the evening news and prompted disaster declarations. He tried the radio, but got only static. The power flickered twice and went out, leaving him in an apocalyptic twilight that seemed to press against the windows like something alive and hungry. Time became elastic in the strange half-light. Jacob dozed fitfully in his father's old recliner, jerking awake whenever the wind shifted or debris struck the house with particular violence. The storm's voice changed pitch and timbre as it moved, sometimes howling like a wounded animal, sometimes murmuring like distant conversation. When it finally passed, the silence felt as profound as the noise had been overwhelming. Jacob stepped onto his porch into a world transformed. Dust covered everything in drifts and curves, sculpting the familiar landscape into alien geography. His truck was buried in the windows. The chicken coop looked like a sand dune with a roof. Even the air tasted different, thin and metallic, as if the storm had sucked something essential out of it. The cattle were nowhere to be seen, which meant they'd either found better shelter or been scattered across half the county. Jacob grabbed a shovel and began the process of digging out, starting with the truck. He'd need a mobile to search for his livestock. That's when he saw the wedding dress. It was caught on the barbed wire fence about 30 yards from the house. White silk and lace turned brown with dust, but unmistakably formal wear. Jacob approached slowly, thinking it must have been blown from someone's clothesline or storage shed miles away. Dust storms were notorious for carrying objects to impossible distances. But as he got closer, he realized the dress wasn't empty. Woman lay crumpled beneath the fence, unconscious and covered in dirt but breathing. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair matted with dust and a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't streaked with grime and blood. From a cut on her forehead, Jacob knelt beside her, checking for obvious injuries. No broken bones that he could see, though her left wrist was swollen and might be sprained. Her pulse was steady but weak, and her breathing seemed normal despite the dust that must have filled her lungs. "Ma'am." He touched her shoulder gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, but her eyelids fluttered as if she were fighting to wake up. Jacob noticed then that her eyes, when they briefly opened, didn't track properly. They moved independently, unfocused, seeing nothing. She was blind. The realization hit him like a physical blow. A blind woman, alone in a wedding dress, unconscious, in the aftermath of a dust storm that had traveled hundreds of miles. How was that possible? Where had she come from? And why was no one looking for her? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jacob scooped her up carefully, surprised by how light she was. The wedding dress was elaborate, with pearl buttons and intricate beadwork that spoke of money and careful planning. This wasn't some casual ceremony dress. This was the kind of gown that cost more than Jacob's truck was worth. He carried her to the house, navigating the dust drifts and debris with careful steps. Inside, he laid her on the living room couch and covered her with his grandmother's quilt. The cut on her forehead needed attention, and she'd need water when she woke up. While he cleaned the wound with antiseptic from his first aid kit, Jacob studied her face. Even unconscious and covered in dust, she was strikingly beautiful. High cheekbones, full lips, delicate features that belonged in magazines rather than on failing ranches in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Her hands told a different story. Soft, with perfectly manicured nails and skin that had never known hard labor. No calluses, no scars, no wedding ring despite the dress. Whoever she was, she came from money and privilege, a world as foreign to Jacob as the surface of Mars. The woman stirred as he finished cleaning her cut, murmuring something too soft to understand. Her unfocused eyes opened and closed several times before staying open, staring at nothing with the particular intensity of the blind. "Where?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from dust and confusion. "Where am I?" "You're safe," Jacob said, keeping his voice gentle. "You're at the Broken Arrow Ranch in Montana. I found you after the dust storm." She tried to sit up, wincing as her injured wrist took weight. Jacob helped her, adjusting the pillow behind her back. "I can't," She reached up to touch her eyes, panic creeping into her voice. "I can't see anything." "Ma'am, I think you might be blind," Jacob said carefully. "Your eyes don't seem to be tracking right. Has this happened before?" The panic in her face deepened. "Blind? No, I don't understand. What dust storm? What ranch?" Her hands fluttered to her dress, feeling the elaborate fabric with growing confusion. "Why am I wearing—" She trailed off, her face cycling through emotions Jacob couldn't read. Fear, confusion, something that might have been relief, then fear again. "What's your name?" he asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Jacob watched her face cycle through expressions he recognized from his own mirror during the worst. Nights, confusion, fear, and the particular kind of loss that came from having nowhere to turn. "You don't remember anything?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Your name? Where you came from? What happened before the storm?" She shook her head slowly, wincing as the movement aggravated whatever injury had left her unconscious. Her fingers traced the intricate beadwork on her dress with the careful precision of someone learning the world through touch. "This dress," she said finally. "It's expensive, isn't it? The fabric, the construction. Someone spent a lot of money on this." Jacob nodded, then remembered she couldn't see him. "It looks like it cost more than my truck, the kind of dress you'd wear to a fancy wedding." "My wedding." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Maybe. Though you're not wearing a ring." She held up her left hand, examining it with her fingertips, as if the answers might be written in braille across her palm. "I feel like there should be something there. Not a ring, exactly, but something." The afternoon light filtering through. The dust-caked windows cast everything in sepia tones, making the scene feel like an old photograph someone had forgotten in a drawer. Jacob found himself studying her profile, trying to solve a puzzle with pieces he couldn't see. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "Jacob Thornfield. This is my ranch, or what's left of it. Jacob." She repeated his name like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. "That's a good, solid name. Biblical. My grandmother's choice. She was big on Old Testament names." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "I like it. It sounds trustworthy." The compliment caught him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had said anything positive about him or his circumstances that he'd almost forgotten what encouragement sounded like. "We should get you to a doctor," he said. "Head injuries and memory loss. That's serious business." Her smile faded. "I don't have any money. At least, I don't think I do. This dress doesn't have pockets, and I can't remember having a purse or wallet." Jacob had been trying not to think about the practical implications of his Good Samaritan act. A trip to the emergency room would cost money he didn't have, but letting someone with a head injury go untreated seemed like the kind of thing that kept you awake at night for all the wrong reasons. "Let's worry about that later," he said. "Right. Now you need rest and food. When did you last eat?" She considered this with the same intensity she'd given his other questions. "I can't remember, but I'm hungry, really hungry." Jacob's own stomach had been growling for hours. The dust storm had disrupted his normal routine, and he'd been running on adrenaline since finding her. "I'll make us something," he said, standing up. "Nothing fancy, eggs and whatever else I can scrounge up. Can I help?" The offer surprised him. "You sure? You've been through a lot today. I need to do something with my hands. Sitting still makes the not remembering worse." Jacob helped her to the kitchen, guiding her around the furniture and debris that had found its way inside during the storm. She moved with the careful grace of someone recently blinded, testing each step and trailing her fingers along walls and countertops to map the space. "The floor's pretty dirty from the dust," he warned. "I haven't had a chance to clean up yet." "Dirt washes off," she said. "What can I do?" He set her up at the kitchen table with a bowl of eggs to crack while he cleared space on the stove and located a pan that wasn't coated in dust. Watching her work, he was struck by how quickly she adapted. Her movements were deliberate and careful, but not hesitant. She cracked eggs with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before, even if she couldn't remember when or where. "You're good at that," he observed. "Am I? It feels natural, but then again, maybe everyone knows how to crack eggs. Trust me, they don't. I've seen grown men turn a dozen eggs into abstract art." That earned him another smile, and Jacob found himself working harder to keep the conversation light. There was something about her presence that made the kitchen feel less empty, less like a museum of his family's fading dreams. He scrambled the eggs with cheese, the last of a block he'd been rationing, and added some herbs from his grandmother's garden that had somehow survived both neglect and the dust storm. The result was simple but filling, the kind of meal that tasted better shared than eaten alone. "This is delicious," she said after her first bite. "Simple but perfect. My grandmother's recipe. She always said the secret was not to overthink it." Smart woman. I wish I could remember if I knew anyone like that. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of forks against plates and the settling cracks of the old house. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, and Jacob could hear his cattle lowing in the distance. At least some of them had survived the storm. "Jacob," she said eventually, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "This ranch, you said it was... What's left of it? Are you in trouble?" The question was so direct it took him by surprise. Most people danced around his financial situation, treating it like a contagious disease they might catch by acknowledging it. "Why do you ask?" "The way you move around the house, like you're saying goodbye to things. And earlier, when you were talking about the doctor, I could hear the worry in your voice, not just about me, about money." Jacob set down his fork, studying her face. Her unseeing eyes seemed to look right through him, but her expression was gentle, not judgmental. "You're pretty observant for someone who can't see. Maybe that's why I can hear it so clearly. So, are you in trouble?" "Yeah," he admitted. "Pretty deep trouble. This place has been in my family for 3 generations, and I'm about to be the one who loses it." "How deep?" The question should have felt intrusive, but somehow it didn't. Maybe it was because she was a stranger with no memory, someone who couldn't judge him based on his family's history or the community's expectations. "Mortgage is 2 months behind. Property taxes due in 6 weeks. Feed bills, equipment loans, medical debt from when my parents died. The numbers don't add up, and I'm running out of things to sell." "What would you need to save it?" Jacob had run the calculation so many times the numbers were burned into his brain. "Realistically, about 40,000 to get current on everything, and buy enough time to turn things around. Might as well be 40 million. She was quiet for a long moment, pushing the remaining eggs around her plate. "That's a lot of money. More than I'll see in the next 5 years, assuming I can find steady work after this place gets foreclosed." "You love it here." It wasn't a question, and Jacob didn't treat it like one. "It's been home for as long as I can remember. My grandfather built the main house with his own hands. My father expanded the operation, added the horse barn and guest cabin. 3 generations of Thornfields have worked this land, raised cattle, built something that mattered. And now I'm the one who let it all fall apart." She reached across the table, her hand finding his with surprising accuracy. Her fingers were warm and soft, a stark contrast to his own work-roughened skin. "You didn't let anything fall apart," she said firmly. "Sometimes the world just happens to us, and we do the best we can with what we're dealt." The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid him. Jacob realized it had been months since anyone had offered him comfort or understanding instead of advice, or pity. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not telling me what I should have done differently." She squeezed his hand gently before letting go. I don't remember much, but I'm pretty sure judgment is easier when you're not the one carrying the weight. After lunch, Jacob helped her explore the house, letting her map the layout with her hands and feet. She ran her fingers along the walls, furniture and door frames with the systematic thoroughness of someone creating a mental blueprint. In the living room, she paused at the mantelpiece, where family photographs chronicled 3 generations of Thornfield history. Jacob described each picture: his grandparents on their wedding day, his father as a young man with his first horse, family Christmas mornings and summer barbecues. "You look like your father," she said, her fingers tracing the frame of a photo. She couldn't see. How could you possibly know that? Your voice changes when you talk about him, gets warmer. And the way you describe his face, it's like looking in a mirror and seeing someone you admire. Jacob had never thought about it that way. But she was right. His father had been everything Jacob aspired to be: strong, reliable, someone who kept his word and took care of his responsibilities. He would have figured out how to save this place, Jacob said. Maybe. Or maybe he would have faced the same challenges you're facing and done exactly what you're doing, fighting for every day and refusing to give up. The guest cabin proved to be in better shape than Jacob had expected. The dust storm had left its mark, but the structure was sound and the basic amenities functional. He spent an hour cleaning and airing it out while she organized the small kitchen with the patience of someone who understood that rushing led to mistakes. "This is perfect," she said when he'd finished. "Are you sure you don't mind me staying here? Where else would you go? You don't remember anything and you don't have any money. Besides, I could use the company. What if I'm married? What if someone is looking for me?" Jacob had been wondering the same thing. "Then we'll figure that out when it happens. For now, you need a safe place to recover, and I've got a safe place. Seems like a fair trade." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold, Jacob walked her back to the main house for dinner. The cleanup from the dust storm would take days, but the immediate crisis had passed. His cattle were scattered, but alive, his buildings damaged but standing, and he had a house guest who saw him more clearly blind than most people did with perfect vision. "Jacob," she said, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, "what should I call myself? I can't just be hey you indefinitely. What feels right to you?" She was quiet for several minutes, tilting her head as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "Emma," she said finally. "I don't know why, but when I think about having a name, that's what comes to mind." "Emma," Jacob repeated. "That's a good name. Emma Thornfield has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The comment was so casual, it took him a moment to process what she'd said. When he did, his face grew warm in the darkness. "Emma," he started, but she was already laughing. "Sorry, that came out wrong. I meant Emma staying at the Thornfield Ranch. Not Emma married to a Thornfield, though you seem like good husband material." "How would you know? You found a strange woman unconscious in your yard, and your first thought was to help her. You fed me, cleaned my wounds, gave me a place to stay, and haven't asked for anything in return. Either you're genuinely kind, or you're playing a very long game. Maybe I'm just too tired to be anything but honest. Maybe. Or maybe you're exactly the kind of person your grandmother raised you to be." Jacob found himself smiling in the darkness. Emma, the name suited her, had a way of seeing the best in things, even when she couldn't see at all. It was a gift he'd forgotten existed, and he realized how much he'd missed having hope in his life. "Emma? Yes? I'm glad the storm brought you here. Even though I'm another mouth to feed and another problem to solve, especially because of that. Turns out my problems feel smaller when I'm helping someone else with theirs." "That," she said softly, "might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me, at least as far as I can remember." 3 days after the dust storm, Jacob woke to the sound of Emma singing. Her voice drifted through his bedroom window from the direction of the guest cabin, a haunting melody that seemed to float on the morning air like mist over water. He'd never heard the song before, but it carried the weight of something ancient and sorrowful, the kind of music that lived in the spaces between heartbeats. Jacob dressed quickly and stepped onto his porch, drawn by the sound. Emma sat on the cabin's front steps, her face turned toward the sunrise she couldn't see, her voice weaving through notes that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory. When the song ended, the silence felt profound. "That was beautiful," he called out, walking toward her. "What was it?" She startled slightly, then smiled. "I don't know. I woke up with it in my head, like it had been there all night waiting for me to remember it. You have a gift." "Do I?" "It doesn't feel like talent, more like something I can't not do. Like breathing." Jacob settled beside her on the steps, noting how she'd arranged herself to catch the morning sun. 3 days of recovery had brought color back to her cheeks and steadiness to her movements, but questions about her past multiplied rather than diminished. The previous evening, she'd demonstrated an uncanny ability to navigate the ranch incomplete. Darkness, moving through the barn and outbuildings with confidence that seemed impossible for someone who'd been blind for less than a week. When Jacob mentioned it, she'd gone quiet for a long time before admitting she didn't understand it either. "I've been thinking about your cattle," she said now, interrupting his thoughts. "What about them?" "Yesterday, when you were checking on them, you mentioned they were scattered but healthy. How many are still missing?" Jacob had been putting off a complete count, dreading what he might find. 7, maybe 8 heads. They could be anywhere within a 20-mile radius after a storm like that. "What happens if you don't find them?" "I lose money I can't afford." "To lose? Each cow represents about $800 in value, plus whatever calves they might have produced. It's the difference between barely surviving and completely drowning." Emma was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns. On the wooden step. "I want to help you find them." "Emma, that's kind of you, but I'm serious. I know I can't see, but I can hear things you might miss. Cattle low, move through brush, leave tracks. There might be ways I can help that don't require sight." Jacob studied her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw. "It's a rough country out there. Gullies, ravines, places where a person could get hurt even with perfect vision. I'm not made of glass, Jacob, and I'm tired of being helpless." The frustration in her voice was raw and honest. Jacob realized he'd been treating her like an invalid. Assuming her blindness made her fragile, but she'd adapted to ranch life with remarkable speed, learning to collect eggs, help with cooking, and navigate the property with growing confidence. "All right," he said, "but we do this smartly. Stay close, communicate constantly, and if I say we turn back, we turn back. Deal." They spent the morning preparing for the search. Jacob loaded the truck with rope, first aid supplies, and enough water for a full day. Emma insisted on packing sandwiches and fruit, moving around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd found her rhythm. "You know," Jacob said, watching her work, "you're handy to have around." "I should hope so. I'd hate to think I was just another burden." "You're not a burden. You're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're the first good thing that's happened to this place in a long time." She stopped what she was doing, her hand stilling on the sandwich she was wrapping. "Jacob, you don't have to say things like that. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true." The silence that followed was charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Emma resumed her work, but Jacob caught the slight smile that played at the corners of her mouth. They started the search in the valley where the cattle had been sheltering before the storm. The fence line was damaged in 3 places, creating gaps large enough for confused animals to wander through. Jacob pointed out the tracks and signs while Emma listened with intense concentration. "There," she said suddenly, pointing toward a cluster of cottonwoods about a 1/4 mile away. "Do you hear that?" Jacob stopped and listened. After a moment, He caught it. The faint sound of cattle moving through brush, the occasional low that indicated distress or confusion. "How did you hear that from here?" "No visual noise," Emma said simply. "When you can't see, you learn to listen differently." They found 4 cows and 2 calves in a drawer behind the cottonwoods, tangled in brush and clearly agitated. Jacob worked to free them, while Emma kept up a steady stream of gentle sounds that seemed to calm the animals. "You're good with them," he observed. "They're scared and confused. I know how that feels." The comment was delivered matter-of-factly, but Jacob heard the underlying pain. He'd been so focused on the practical aspects of Emma's situation that he'd perhaps not fully considered the emotional toll of losing your sight, your memory, and your entire sense of self in one traumatic event. "Emma," he said carefully, "are you okay? I mean, really okay?" She was quiet for a long time, her hands working automatically to untangle a calf from a particularly stubborn piece of brush. "I don't know," she said finally. "Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen, but I don't know what. Like there's something I'm supposed to remember or someone I'm supposed to meet." "Maybe that's normal. Maybe your memory will come back gradually. Maybe. Or maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and the forgetting is just making room for something new." Jacob found himself hoping it was the latter. The thought of Emma recovering her memory and disappearing back into whatever life she'd had before was becoming increasingly difficult to contemplate. They found the remaining cattle scattered across 3 different locations, each requiring careful navigation and patient work to extract from various predicaments. Emma proved invaluable, her hearing sharp enough to detect animals hidden in brush and her calm presence helping to settle spooked cattle. By late afternoon, they'd recovered all but one, a young bull that had wandered farther than the rest. Jacob was ready to call it a day when Emma grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, "listen." In the distance, so faint it was almost lost in the wind, came the sound of an animal in distress. Not the normal lowing of cattle, but something sharper, more urgent. "That's not normal," Jacob said. "No, it's not. Something's wrong." They followed the sound across a ridge and down into a rocky canyon that Jacob rarely visited. The terrain was treacherous, full of loose stones and hidden crevices that could trap or injure both animals and humans. They found the bull at the bottom of the canyon, trapped in a narrow gap between 2 large boulders. He was alive, but clearly exhausted from struggling, his eyes wide with fear and frustration. "Can you get him out?" Emma asked. Jacob studied the situation, noting the angle of the trap and the bull's position. "Maybe it's going to require some creative rigging and a lot of patience." "What can I do? Keep him calm while I work. Talk to him. Let him know we're here to help." Emma positioned herself where the bull could hear her voice clearly and began a steady stream of gentle sounds and words. Jacob had never heard her speak to the cattle before, but she seemed to have an instinctive understanding of what would comfort them. The rescue took nearly 2 hours of careful work with ropes and leverage. Jacob had to dismantle part of the boulder arrangement to create enough space for the bull to escape, all while ensuring the animal didn't panic and injure himself further. When the bull finally stepped free, he stood still for a moment as if testing his newfound freedom. Then he shook himself, looked directly at Emma as if thanking her, and trotted away toward home. "Well," Jacob said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "that's the last of them. All 43 heads accounted for?" "All 43, thanks to you." Emma smiled, her face flushed with exhaustion and satisfaction. "I told you I could help. You did more than help. You saved me thousands of dollars and probably saved that bull's life. We saved him. Together." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning that extended far beyond cattle rescue. Jacob found himself studying Emma's face in the late afternoon light, noting how her expression had changed over the past few days. The fear and confusion were still there, but they'd been joined by something else. Purpose, maybe, or the beginning of belonging. "Emma," he said impulsively, "what if you stayed? Stay where? Here, at the ranch. Not just until you remember who you are, but longer. As long as you want. She was quiet for so long that Jacob began to worry he'd overstepped. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and uncertain. Jacob, you don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. I could have done anything. I know you're kind to animals and strangers. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know you make me laugh and challenge me to think differently. I know you make this place feel like home again, instead of just a collection of buildings and debts. What if I'm married? What if someone comes looking for me? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But right now, today, you're here and I'm here, and maybe that's enough. Emma turned her face toward the sound of his voice, her unseeing eyes seeming to look directly into his. Are you asking me to stay because you need help with the ranch? Or because you want me to stay? The question was direct and honest, and it deserved an equally honest answer. Both, Jacob said. I do need help and I can't afford to pay anyone. But that's not why I'm asking. Then why? Because for the first time since my parents died, I don't feel alone. Because you see things I miss and hear things I can't. Because you make me want to fight harder to save this place instead of just going through the motions. And if I stay, what happens to us? Jacob felt his heart rate increase. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Jacob. Of what? Of remembering, of not remembering, of staying and getting hurt, of leaving and regretting it forever. Jacob reached out and took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit in his. I'm scared too, but maybe being scared together is better than being scared alone. Is that what you think this is? Us being together? I think, Jacob said carefully, that whatever this is, it's worth finding out. Emma squeezed his hand, and when she smiled, it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Okay, she said, I'll stay, at least for now. At least for now, Jacob agreed, though he was already hoping for much longer than that. They made their way back to the ranch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The cattle were settling in for the night, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, where Jacob had banked the fire before they left. Jacob, Emma said as they reached the guest cabin, thank you. For what? For making me feel like I have a choice. Like I'm not just a problem to be solved or a responsibility to be managed. You're not either of those things. What am I then? Jacob looked at her standing in the doorway of the cabin, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. Her wedding dress had been replaced by practical clothes they'd found in his mother's closet, but she was still beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. You're Emma, he said simply, and that's enough. She smiled and disappeared inside, leaving Jacob standing alone in the gathering darkness. Above him, the first stars were appearing, and somewhere in the distance, his cattle were settling down for the night. For the first time in months, Jacob Thornfield felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The knock on Jacob's door came at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning, sharp and insistent enough to wake him from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in weeks. He pulled on jeans and a shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and opened the door to find Sheriff Dan Mackenzie standing on his porch with the grim expression of someone bearing bad news. Morning, Jacob. Sorry to wake you so early, but we need to talk. Jacob's stomach dropped. Dan Mackenzie had been sheriff for 15 years, and Jacob's father's friend for longer than that. When he showed up at your door before sunrise, it meant trouble. What's going on, Dan? Can I come in? This isn't a conversation for the porch. Jacob stepped aside, leading Dan to the kitchen where the coffee pot was already gurgling through its morning cycle. Emma must have started it before returning. To the cabin, a small kindness that had become part of their daily routine. Coffee? Jacob offered. Thanks. Dan settled his bulk into one of the kitchen chairs, his uniform creaking with the movement. He was a big man gone soft around the middle, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness. To be easily surprised, Jacob poured 2 cups and sat across from his unexpected guest, noting how Dan's gaze kept drifting toward the window that faced the guest cabin. "So," Jacob said carefully, "what brings you out here at this hour?" Dan wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, using the warmth to buy himself time. "Got a call yesterday from the state police. They're looking for a missing person, a young woman, mid-20s, last seen in Billings about a week ago." Jacob's blood chilled. "What's this got to do with me? Description matches someone who might be staying on your property. Dark hair, about 5'6", wearing a wedding dress when she disappeared." The coffee turned bitter in Jacob's mouth. "What else did they tell you?" "Her name's Elena Castellanos. She's the daughter of Marcus Castellanos, owns a chain of hotels across the southwest. Rich family, influential people, the kind who make phone calls when their daughters go missing." "Elena," Jacob repeated, testing the name. It didn't sound right somehow, didn't fit the woman who'd been sharing his meals and helping with his cattle. "Jacob, I need to ask, is there someone staying in your guest cabin?" There was no point in lying. Dan would find out anyway. And Jacob had never been good at deception. "Yes. Is she the woman they're looking for?" "I don't know. Maybe. The description fits, but she doesn't remember anything about her past. Head injury from the dust storm." Dan leaned back in his chair, studying Jacob's face. "Tell me what happened." Jacob laid out the story. Finding Emma, unconscious after the storm, her blindness and memory loss, her decision to stay and help with the ranch. He left out the growing feelings between them, the way she made him laugh, the hope that had been building in his chest, like spring after a long winter. "Amnesia's convenient," Dan said when Jacob finished. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing necessarily. But rich girls don't usually end up unconscious in wedding dresses on failing ranches, unless there's more to the story." Jacob felt his temper rising. "She's not faking it, Dan. You can see it in her eyes, the confusion, the fear. Nobody's that good an actress." "Maybe not, but there are other possibilities." "Such as?" "Maybe she ran away. Maybe the wedding was arranged or forced. Maybe she saw an opportunity to disappear and took it." The suggestion hit Jacob like a physical blow. Had Emma been using him? Had her amnesia been an elaborate deception designed to hide from her family? And responsibilities. "What happens now?" Jacob asked. "I need to talk to her. Ask some questions. See if anything shakes loose from her memory. And if she is this Eleanor person, then I call the state police, and her family comes to collect her." Jacob stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals. A week ago, he'd been a man with nothing to lose. Now the thought of Emma leaving felt like losing everything that mattered. "Dan, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. What if she doesn't want to go back? What if her family isn't what they seem?" Dan's expression softened slightly. "Jacob, I know you've gotten attached to this girl, but if she's Elena Castellanos, she's got a life waiting for her. Money, family, responsibilities. You can't just keep someone because you've fallen for them. I haven't. Son, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I can see it written all over your face." Jacob felt heat rise in his cheeks. What if her family is the reason she ran away? What if going back means putting her in danger? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But first, I need to talk to her. They walked to the guest cabin in silence, Jacob's mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if Emma really was Elena? What if her amnesia was real, but her family was the reason she'd been fleeing? What if she remembered everything the moment she saw Dan's uniform? Emma was sitting on the cabin's front steps, her face turned toward the morning sun. She'd braided her hair back and was wearing one of his mother's old work shirts over jeans they'd found in town. She looked comfortable, settled, like she belonged exactly where she was. "Emma," Jacob called out, "we have a visitor." She turned toward his voice, and Jacob saw the moment she registered the presence of a stranger. Her shoulders tensed, and her hands moved to grip the edge of the step. "Emma, this is Sheriff Dan Mackenzie. Dan, this is Emma." Dan stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you some questions." "What kind of questions?" "About who you are and where you came from. There's a family looking for their daughter, and you might be her." Emma's face went pale. "I told Jacob I don't remember anything from before the storm." "I understand that, Mom, but sometimes talking through things can help memories surface. Would you mind if I ask you about a few details?" Emma looked toward Jacob, her unseeing eyes seeking reassurance. "Is this about the wedding dress?" "Partly," Dan said. "The missing woman was last seen wearing a wedding dress. Her name is Elena Castellanos. Does that name mean anything to you?" Jacob watched Emma's face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition. Her expression remained blank, but he noticed her hands trembling slightly. "No," she said quietly. "Should it?" "Elena's family owns a chain of hotels. They have money, influence. She was supposed to be married last week to the son of another prominent family, but she disappeared the night before the ceremony." "I'm sorry for her family," Emma said, "but I don't think I'm her." "Why not?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. "The name doesn't feel right. When Jacob calls me Emma, it feels like coming home. Elena feels like wearing someone else's clothes." Dan pulled out a photograph and held it where Jacob could see. "This is Elena Castellanos." Jacob's heart sank. The woman in the photograph was undeniably Emma. Same face, same dark hair, same delicate features, but the expression was different. Where Emma's face held warmth and determination, Elena's held something colder, more distant. "It's her," Dan said quietly. "No," Emma said firmly, "it's not. Ma'am, I'm looking right at a photograph of Elena Castellanos, and you're identical to her. Maybe I look like her, maybe we're related somehow, but I'm not her." Dan sighed, putting the photograph away. "Elena, your father is worried sick. Your fiancé has been searching day and night. Your whole family thinks you might be dead." At the mention of a fiancé, Emma's face went white. "Fiancé?" "Richard Blackwood. You were supposed to marry him last Saturday at the Castellanos family estate in Santa Fe." Emma stood abruptly, nearly stumbling as she fought for balance. "I need to sit down." Jacob guided her back to the step, noting how her breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Emma, are you all right? I don't know. I feel wrong, like the air is too thick." "Elena," Dan said gently. "What do you remember about Richard Blackwood?" "Nothing. I don't remember anything about anyone. He's a good man from a good family, successful businessman, owns several companies across the Southwest. Your families have been friends for years." Emma shook her head violently. "Stop! Please stop! Elena, my name is Emma!" The words came out as a shout, surprising everyone. "I don't care what photographs you have or what families are looking. For me, I'm Emma. I live here and I'm not going anywhere." Dan looked at Jacob with raised eyebrows. "She seems pretty adamant." "Because I know who I am," Emma continued. "Maybe not where I came from or what happened before, but I know who I am now. I'm the woman who helps Jacob with his cattle and makes coffee in the mornings and feels safe for the first time in as long as I can remember feeling anything. Mom, I understand this is difficult, but do you?" Emma stood again, her hands clenched into fists. "Do you understand what it's like to wake up with no past, no family, no identity, except what you build for yourself day by day? Do you understand what it's like to finally find a place where you belong and then have someone tell you it's all a mistake? Jacob had never seen Emma this agitated. Her usual calm composure had cracked, revealing something fierce and desperate underneath. "Emma," he said softly, "nobody's saying you have to leave, aren't they?" She turned toward Dan's voice. "Sheriff, are you planning to arrest me if I don't go back to this family voluntarily?" Dan shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not planning to arrest anyone, but if your family files missing person reports and you're found safe, there are legal procedures. I'm an adult. I have the right to choose where I live and who I associate with. You do. But if you're suffering from amnesia due to a head injury, there are questions about your capacity to make informed decisions." The words hung in the air like a threat. Jacob felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized the implications. "What exactly are you saying, Dan?" "I'm saying that if Elena Castellanos is mentally incapacitated due to injury, her family might have legal grounds to make decisions on her behalf." Emma sank back down onto the step, the fight going out of her as quickly as it had appeared. "They can force me to go back. Not necessarily, but they can petition for guardianship, especially if they can prove you're not competent to make your own decisions." Jacob felt his world tilting. "She's perfectly competent. She's been helping me run this ranch, making decisions, taking care of herself." That may be true, but a court might see things differently, especially if her family has resources to hire good lawyers. "So what happens now?" Emma asked, her voice small and defeated. "I have to report that I've found you, but I don't have to do it immediately. I could give you some time to think things through, maybe try to remember more about your situation." "How much time?" "A day or two, maybe a week if I'm creative with my paperwork." Emma reached out, her hand finding Jacob's and gripping it tightly. "What do you think I should do?" Jacob looked at her, really looked at her. Seeing Emma but knowing she might be Eleanor, seeing the woman he'd fallen for but understanding she might belong to someone else entirely. "I think," he said carefully, "that you should do whatever feels right to you, and whatever you decide, I'll support you, even if it means losing everything." Jacob squeezed her hand, his heart breaking and mending simultaneously. "Emma, you're not something I can lose. You're someone I've been lucky enough to know." She smiled then, sad and beautiful and heartbreaking. "Thank you." Dan cleared his throat. "I'll give you until Sunday to decide. After that I have to make the call." "Sunday," Emma repeated. 3 days. 3 days, Jacob confirmed. After Dan left, they sat in silence on the cabin steps, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Jacob's cattle moved peacefully through the pasture, and somewhere in the distance a hawk circled on invisible currents. "Jacob," Emma said finally, "what if I really am Elena Castellanos?" "Then you're Elena Castellanos." "That's not what I mean. What if I have a life I can't remember? What if people are depending on me? What if you ran away for a good reason? What if the life you can't remember wasn't worth living?" Emma was quiet for a long time. "I keep thinking about that fiancé, Richard Blackwood. The name makes me feel cold, empty, like winter that never ends. Maybe that means something, or maybe it means nothing. Maybe I'm just a confused woman with a head injury, trying to justify abandoning her responsibilities." Jacob turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Emma, I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, whatever you remember or don't remember, these past few days have been the best of my life." "Jacob, I'm not saying it to pressure you or make your decision harder. I'm saying it because it's true and because you deserve to know that you matter. You've made my life better just by being in it." Emma leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "What are we going to do? We're going to take it one day at a time, and on Sunday you're going to make whatever choice feels right in your heart. And if my heart is wrong, then we'll deal with the consequences together. Above them, The hawk cried once and disappeared over the ridge, leaving only blue sky and the sound of cattle settling into their daily routine. The black Mercedes appeared on the horizon at exactly 2:47 p.m. on Friday, cutting through the Montana landscape like a knife through canvas. Jacob spotted it from the barn, where he was repairing a broken gate hinge, the luxury sedan so out of place among the rolling hills and sagebrush that it might as well have been a spaceship. "Emma," he called toward the house where she was hanging laundry on the line. "We've got company." She froze, a wet shirt still clutched in her hands. "The sheriff?" "No, this is someone else." The Mercedes navigated the ranch's dirt road with careful precision, its driver clearly unfamiliar with the terrain. Jacob could see two figures in the front seats, a man and a woman, both wearing dark clothing that spoke of money and urban sophistication. "Should I hide?" Emma asked, moving closer to Jacob's side. "No. If they're here, they already know you're here. Better to face whatever this is head-on." The car came to a stop 30 yards from the house, and the driver's door opened to reveal a man in his mid-50s wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a bank balance. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and sharp features that belonged on corporate boardrooms and country club terraces. The passenger door opened to reveal a woman of similar age, elegantly dressed in black, her face tight with worry and something that might have been anger. She moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to being watched and judged. "Elena," the woman called out, her voice carrying across the yard with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Elena, come here right now." Emma flinched as if she'd been struck. "I know that voice." "Your mother?" I think so." "God, Jacob, I think that's my mother." The man approached first, his eyes fixed on Emma with laser intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried a slight accent that suggested money and education. "Elena Marie Castellanos, you have put this family through hell." Emma stepped backward, bumping into Jacob. "My name is Emma. Your name is Elena, and you are my daughter." The man's voice rose with each word. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand the chaos you've created?" "Marcus, please." The woman moved to her husband's side, her own voice strained with emotion. "She's clearly not well." Marcus Castellanos turned his attention to Jacob, his expression shifting from parental fury to cold assessment. "You must be the man who's been harboring my daughter. I'm Jacob Thornfield, this is my ranch. And you found Elena after some sort of accident?" "Yes, sir. After the dust storm last week, she was unconscious and injured." "And it never occurred to you to contact the authorities immediately?" Jacob felt his temper rising. "She had a head injury and no memory. I was more concerned with getting her medical attention than—" "What medical attention?" Marcus's voice sharpened. "What doctor examined her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Jacob realized he'd made a crucial mistake. In his concern for Emma's emotional state and his own financial situation, he'd never taken her to see a proper doctor. We were planning to— You kept an injured woman with memory loss isolated on a remote branch without medical care?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "Mr. Thornfield, that borders on criminal negligence. Now wait just a minute. Elena, get in the car." The woman, Elena's mother, spoke with quiet authority. "We're taking you to see Dr. Morrison in Billings. You need proper medical evaluation." Emma shook her head violently. "I'm not going anywhere." "You are sick, Mija. You have amnesia from a head injury. You cannot make rational decisions in your condition." "I'm making perfectly rational decisions. I'm choosing to stay here with Jacob, where I feel safe and useful and happy." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Happy? Elena, you're living in poverty on a failing ranch with a man you've known for a week. You have responsibilities, commitments, a life waiting for you." "What life?" Emma's voice rose with desperation. "What wonderful life was I running from in a wedding dress during a dust storm?" The question silenced her parents. Marcus and his wife exchanged a look that spoke of secrets and complications. "Eleanor," her mother said carefully, "you were confused about the wedding. Pre-wedding nerves. It happens to many brides." "What about Richard?" Emma pressed. "Tell me about my fiancé. Tell me why his name makes me feel like I'm drowning." Another loaded silence. Jacob watched the interplay between the family members, noting the things they weren't saying as much as the things they were. "Richard is a good man from a respected family," Marcus said finally. "The marriage will unite two of the most successful hospitality empires in the Southwest." "Unite two empires," Emma repeated slowly. "Not two people who love each other. Two empires." "Love grows, Elena. What matters is compatibility, shared values, mutual respect. And money," Emma said bitterly. "Don't forget the money." Marcus's mask of paternal concern slipped slightly. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're not thinking clearly. The Elena I raised would never speak to her family this way. Maybe the Elena you raised was never allowed to speak at all." Jacob saw Emma's mother flinch at the words. There was pain in her expression and something that might have been guilt. "Elena, please." Her mother's voice was softer now, pleading. "Come home with us. Let the doctors examine you. If you still want to leave after you've recovered, we can discuss it. And Richard is concerned about you. He wants to help with your recovery." Emma turned toward Jacob, her unseeing eyes seeking his face. "What do you think?" Jacob felt the weight of the moment, understanding that his next words might determine Emma's entire future. Her parents stood watching him, their expressions ranging from hostile to calculating. "I think," Jacob said carefully, "that you should do whatever you feel is right, but I also think you deserve to know the truth about your situation before. You decide." "What truth?" Marcus demanded. Jacob looked directly at Emma's father. "Why was your daughter wearing a wedding dress during a dust storm hundreds of miles from home? Why did she run away from her own wedding? And why are you more concerned about business empires than your daughter's happiness? How dare you? It's a fair question, Dad." The voice that spoke was different from Emma's usual tone. Stronger, more confident, with an edge of steel that suggested the speaker was accustomed to being taken seriously. Jacob realized with a chill that he might be hearing Elena Castellanos for the first time. "Elena?" her mother whispered. "I'm remembering things," Emma said slowly. "Pieces, fragments, Richard's hands on my shoulders, too tight, leaving bruises. Arguments about the wedding, about money, about what I could and couldn't do after we were married." Marcus paled slightly. "Elena, you're confused." "Am I? I remember a conversation where you told Richard he could manage me after we were married. I remember signing papers I wasn't allowed to read. I remember feeling like a piece of property being transferred from one owner to another." "That's not how it was." "Then how was it?" Emma's voice was gaining strength with each word. "Tell me, Dad. Tell me why I felt so trapped that I ran away from my own wedding." The silence stretched until Jacob thought it might snap. Finally, Emma's mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because we needed the merger with the Blackwood companies. Our hotels are failing, Elena. We're on the verge of bankruptcy, and Richard's family offered to buy us out as part of the marriage contract. So you sold me. We secure your future. Richard agreed to take care of you, to give you everything you could want. Except freedom. Except choice. Except the right to say no." Marcus stepped forward, his composure cracking. "Elena, you don't understand business. You never have. This marriage would have solved everything. For you, it would have solved everything for you." Jacob watched the family drama unfold with growing understanding. Emma hadn't lost her memory in the dust storm. She'd been running from a forced marriage, from parents who saw her as a business asset rather than a daughter. "Emma," he said quietly. She turned toward his voice, and he saw tears streaming down her face. "I remember, Jacob. I remember why I ran. And what do you remember about Richard? Her face went white. He said marriage was a contract, and I was expected to fulfill my obligations. He said love was a luxury neither of us could afford, but that I'd learn to appreciate the security he could provide. And the bruises. Jacob's voice was deadly quiet. He said I needed to learn respect, that my father had been too lenient with me, but that would change after the wedding. Marcus stepped forward angrily. That's enough. Elena, you're clearly suffering from trauma-induced delusions. Show them your wrists. The voice belonged to Emma's mother, and everyone turned to stare at her in shock. Show them your wrists, Elena. Emma slowly rolled up her sleeves, revealing faded bruises on both wrists, finger-shaped marks that spoke of someone grabbing her too hard, too often. Oh God, Jacob breathed. Those are from Richard, Eleanor's mother said, her voice hollow. She came to me the week before the wedding, begging me to call it off. She showed me the bruises and told me he'd been correcting her behavior. And you did nothing? Jacob's voice was filled with disgust. We told her to give Richard time, that he was just nervous about the wedding. Tears were streaming down the woman's face now. We said all marriages required adjustment periods. Marcus looked like a man watching his world collapse. The contracts were already signed. The merger papers were in place. If the marriage didn't happen, your daughter was being abused and you cared more about your business deals? We thought. We hoped. Richard promised it would get better after the wedding. Emma sank onto the porch steps, her face in her hands. I remember it. All now. The fear, the feeling of being trapped, the certainty that if I married Richard I'd disappear completely. Jacob sat beside her, taking her hand in his. So you ran. I got in my car and started driving. I didn't know where I was going, just away. The storm caught me somewhere in Colorado. My car broke down and I started walking. I must have been walking for hours when the dust storm hit, and your blindness? I don't know. Maybe the trauma, maybe something from the storm. Maybe my mind just shut down everything I didn't want to see. Marcus and his wife stood frozen, watching their daughter piece together the truth they'd tried to bury. Elena, her mother said finally, what do you want us to do? Emma looked up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice steady. I want you to call Richard and tell him the engagement is off. I want you to tear up whatever contracts you signed, and I want you to leave me alone. Elena, be reasonable. The family business can go to hell, Dad. I won't be sacrificed to save your hotels. And what will you do? Stay here and play ranch wife with a man you barely know? Jacob felt the barb hit home, but Emma's response surprised him. Maybe. Or maybe I'll figure out what I want to do with my own life for the first time in 24 years. Either way, it'll be my choice. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyer. If you're mentally incompetent due to trauma, try it, Emma said calmly. I'll tell them exactly why I ran away, complete with photographs of my bruises and testimony about Richard's correction methods. How do you think that will look in court? How do you think it will affect your precious business deals? Marcus stared at his daughter, as if seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the compliant young woman they'd raised. This was someone who'd found her backbone and wasn't afraid to use it. You're making a mistake, Elena. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Emma's mother approached slowly, her hands extended, in a gesture of peace. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what we put you through, for what we allowed Richard to do. I know you are, Mom, but sorry doesn't change anything. What if we could find another way? What if we could solve the business problems without forcing you into marriage? Emma was quiet for a long moment. You'd do that? I'd try. Your father might not agree, but I'd try. Marcus threw up his hands in frustration. And lose everything our family has built for 3 generations. Maybe some things aren't worth saving if this is the price. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jacob watched the family dynamic shift and realign as years of unspoken truths finally found their voice. "I need time to think," Emma said, finally. "About everything, about what I want, what I remember, what kind of relationship we can have going forward." "How much time?" her mother asked. "I don't know. Maybe a lot. Maybe forever." Marcus and his wife exchanged another look, this one filled with resignation and something that might have been respect. "We'll be staying at the hotel in town for a few days," her mother said. "If you want to talk, I'll let you know." After her parents left, Emma and Jacob sat in silence on the porch steps, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The crisis had passed, but Jacob sensed that everything had changed between them. "So," he said finally, "Elena Castellanos." "Emma Thornfield," she corrected. "If you'll have me." Jacob turned to stare at her. "What?" I said. "Emma Thornfield, as in Emma who chooses to stay with Jacob Thornfield and help him save his ranch and maybe, if he's interested, see what this thing between us could become." "Emma, I know what I want now, Jacob. I want to choose my own life, make my own decisions, love who I want to love, and I choose you." Jacob felt his heart stop and restart. "Even though I'm broke and losing my ranch, especially because of that, we'll figure it out together." "And your family? Your old life?" "My old life was a cage. This is freedom." Jacob leaned over and kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they broke apart, Emma was smiling. "By the way," she said, "I have an idea about your financial problems." "Oh? My trust fund, the one my grandmother left me that my parents can't touch. It should be enough to save the ranch, and then some." Jacob stared at her in shock. "Emma, I can't. It's not charity, Jacob. It's an investment in us, in our future." "Our future?" "Well," Emma said with a grin, "someone's going to have to teach me how to be a proper ranch wife. I figure that might take about 50 years or so." Jacob laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. "I think I can manage that." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for just a week ago. The silver Porsche that roared up the ranch road 3 days later carried trouble in its wake like dust from a summer storm. Jacob spotted it from the horse barn, where he was mucking stalls, the sports car's aggressive engine note cutting through the morning quiet with mechanical violence. "That's not your parents," Jacob called to Emma, who was feeding chickens near. "The coop." She froze at the sound, her face going pale. "No, that's Richard." The car skidded to a stop in a spray of gravel, and the man who emerged looked like everything Jacob had imagined, and worse. Richard Blackwood was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that came from expensive grooming and surgical enhancement. His designer jeans and silk shirt screamed money, but his eyes held something cold and calculating that made Jacob's skin crawl. "Elena!" Richard's voice boomed across the yard with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Enough of this ridiculous charade. You're coming home with me right now." Emma straightened, her chin lifting, with the defiance Jacob had come to admire. "My name is Emma, and I'm not going anywhere with you." Richard strode across the yard with predatory purpose, his gaze flicking dismissively over Jacob before focusing entirely on Emma. "Your parents told me about your little memory problem. Very convenient, sweetheart. But the game's over." "It's not a game, and I'm not your sweetheart. You're my fiancée. You signed contracts, made commitments. Your family owes my family significant money, and our marriage is the collateral on that debt." Jacob stepped between them, his hands clenched at his sides. "The lady said she's not interested." Richard laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "The lady is sick in the head and can't make rational decisions. Who are you anyway? The hired help? I'm Jacob Thornfield. This is my ranch. "Ah, the knight in shining armor." Richard's smile was sharp as a blade. "Tell me, cowboy, how much is Elena paying you to play along with this fantasy?" "Nobody's paying me anything." "No? Then you're an even bigger fool than I thought." Richard turned his attention back to Emma. "Elena, stop this nonsense. You have responsibilities, obligations. People are depending on you." "What people? You? My parents? People who see me as a business transaction? I see you as my future wife, as the mother of my children, as someone who will help me build an empire that will last generations." Emma shuddered visibly. "You see me as breeding stock and a business merger. I see you as what you are, a spoiled rich girl who's never had to face real consequences. But that ends now." Richard pulled out his phone and showed Emma the screen. "These are photos of the contracts your father signed. Marriage agreements, financial guarantees, merger documents. If you don't honor these commitments, your family loses. Everything, the hotels, the land, the trust funds, all of it goes to my family to settle the debt." Emma's face went white. "That's not possible. Your father was more desperate than you knew. He put up everything as collateral, including your trust fund. The only way to save any of it is for you to marry me as agreed." Jacob felt his stomach drop. Emma's trust fund, the money she'd offered to save his ranch, was part of the collateral. If she didn't marry Richard, it would all disappear. "You're lying," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Call your father. Ask him about the additional papers he signed after you ran away. Ask him what happens to your precious family legacy if you don't come home." Emma's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. The conversation with her father was brief and devastating. When she hung up, tears were streaming down her face. "It's true," she whispered. "Everything's tied to the marriage contract. If I don't marry Richard, my family loses everything, including my grandmother's trust fund." Richard's smile was triumphant and cruel. "So you see, sweetheart, you don't really have a choice. You can either come home voluntarily, or you can watch your family lose everything they've worked 3 generations to build." Jacob watched Emma's shoulders sag under the weight of impossible choices. The woman who'd found her strength and independence just days ago was being crushed by emotional blackmail and financial manipulation. "There has to be another way," Jacob said. "There is," Richard replied smoothly. "Elena marries me, honors her commitments, and everyone gets what they deserve." "And what do you get out of it?" Emma asked quietly. "A beautiful wife from a good family, control of the largest hotel chain in the Southwest, and the satisfaction of knowing you'll learn to appreciate what I can give you." The possessive way he said control made Jacob's blood boil. This wasn't about love or partnership. It was about ownership and domination. "What if she says no anyway?" Jacob challenged. Richard's expression darkened. "Then her family faces bankruptcy and criminal charges for fraud. You see, some of those loans her father took out were based on false information about the family's assets. If the marriage doesn't happen, my family will be forced to pursue all available legal remedies." The threat was clear and devastating. Emma would either marry Richard or watch her family face financial ruin and possible imprisonment. "You bastard," Jacob said quietly. "I'm a businessman protecting my investments. Elena is part of that investment portfolio." Emma stood perfectly still for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions Jacob couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow and defeated. "How long do I have to decide?" 24 hours. I've booked the chapel in Vegas. For tomorrow evening, we can have a simple ceremony, sign the papers, and put this whole unfortunate episode behind us. And if I refuse, then you can explain to your parents why their lives are ruined because their daughter was too selfish to honor her obligations." Richard pulled a ring box from his pocket and held it out to Emma. "This belonged to my grandmother. It's worth more than this entire ranch. You'll wear it as a symbol of our commitment and the life you're choosing." Emma stared at the box as if it contained a venomous snake. "I need time to think." 24 hours. "I'll be staying at the hotel in town." "Don't try to run again, Elena. My security team is already monitoring the roads, and your parents have agreed to freeze your accounts until this matter is resolved." After Richard left, Emma collapsed onto the porch steps as if her strings had been cut. Jacob sat beside her, wanting to offer comfort, but not knowing what words could possibly help. "I'm trapped," she said finally. "No matter what I choose, someone gets hurt. There has to be a way out of this." "Is there?" "Richard controls everything now. My family's money, their freedom, even my trust fund. If I don't marry him, my parents go to prison and lose everything." Jacob took her hand, noting how cold her fingers were despite the warm afternoon. "What if we fought him? Hired lawyers, challenged the contracts? With what money? And even if we could prove the contracts were signed under duress, it could take years to resolve. My parents would be bankrupted by the legal fees alone. Then, what do you want to do?" Emma was quiet for so long, Jacob thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to run away with you. Right now, tonight. Drive until we reach somewhere he can't find us, and start over with nothing but each other." "Then let's do it." She turned to look at him, her unseeing eyes wide with surprise. "You'd do that? Give up your ranch, your family's legacy, everything you've worked for?" "In a heartbeat." "Emma, this place is just land and buildings. You're the first person who's made me feel alive. In years. I'd rather have nothing with you than everything without you." Emma's face crumpled, and she leaned against him, sobbing. "I can't ask you to do that, and I can't abandon my family no matter what they've done." "So what's the alternative?" "I marry Richard. I honor the contracts and save my family's legacy, and sacrifice your own happiness forever. Maybe that's the price of being born into privilege. Maybe some of us don't get to choose our own lives." Jacob felt something fierce and desperate rise in his chest. "No, I won't let you do that. There has to be another way." "Such as?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. It was risky and possibly insane, but it might be their only chance. "What if we could prove Richard's contracts are fraudulent? What if we could show that he manipulated your father into signing under false pretenses?" "How?" "By getting him to admit it. On tape. If we could record him bragging about how he trapped your family." Emma shook her head. "He's too smart for that. He'll never confess to anything illegal. Maybe not intentionally. But what if he thought he was safe? What if he thought he'd already won and could afford to gloat?" "What are you suggesting?" Jacob took a deep breath. "What if you agreed to marry him? What if you called him tonight and said you'd reconsidered, that you were ready to honor your commitments?" "Jacob, no, I can't actually marry him." "You wouldn't have to. We'd record the conversation, get him to reveal the truth about how he manipulated the contracts. Then we'd take the evidence to the authorities. And if it doesn't work, if he doesn't say anything incriminating, then we run, tonight before the wedding. At least we'll have tried to save your family first." Emma was quiet for a long time, considering the plan. "It's dangerous. If Richard suspects we're recording him, if he realizes it's a trap, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Emma, we can't just let him win without a fight." She squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice held a note of hope he hadn't heard since Richard's arrival. "Okay, let's try it." That evening, Jacob set up his phone to record while Emma made the call. Her performance was flawless, the perfect combination of defeated resignation and reluctant acceptance. "Richard, it's Elena. I've thought about what you said, and you're right. I can't let my family suffer because of my selfishness." Richard's voice was smooth and triumphant. "I knew you'd see reason, sweetheart. You're making the right choice." I want to understand the arrangements, the contracts, the financial details. If I'm going to be your wife, I should know how you how you convinced my father to agree to everything. Your father made it easy. He was so desperate to save the family business that he would have signed anything I put in front of him. I simply made sure the terms were favorable to my interests." "How favorable?" Richard laughed, the sound carrying across the phone with cruel amusement. "Let's just say that once we're married, I'll control not only your family's hotels, but also their personal assets, including your trust fund. Your father signed papers giving me power of attorney over all family finances in case of default on the marriage contract. That seems excessive. It's called leverage, Elena. I learned a long time ago that people are much more cooperative when you control what they value most. In your family's case, that's money and social standing. And the criminal charges you mentioned. A little creative accounting in the loan applications. Nothing too serious, but enough to cause problems. If anyone decided to investigate. Of course, once we're married and the loans are satisfied, those irregularities will be overlooked. So you're saying my father committed fraud at your suggestion? I'm saying your father was a drowning man who grabbed the lifeline I offered, even though it came with hooks. Not my fault he didn't read the fine print." Emma's hand was shaking as she held the phone, but her voice remained steady. "And after we're married, what happens then? Then you learn to be the kind of wife I need. Obedient, supportive, focused on family and business rather than ridiculous romantic notions. Your little adventure here has shown me that you need more structure in your life, more guidance." "What kind of guidance?" Richard's voice dropped to something that made Jacob's skin crawl. "The kind that ensures you never run away again. The kind that helps you understand your place in our marriage and our business empire. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm very good at teaching obedience." Emma ended the call and immediately collapsed into Jacob's arms, shaking with revulsion and fear. "Did you get it?" Jacob checked his phone, relief flooding through him. Every word. Richard just confessed to financial manipulation, coercion, and fraud, plus threats of domestic abuse. "Is it enough?" "It should be. We need to get this to the authorities tonight before the wedding." Emma pulled back to look at him, her face streaked with tears, but her voice steady. "Jacob, what if this doesn't work? What if they can't stop him in time?" "Then we run. Tonight, right now if you want. And your ranch? We'll still be here if we ever come back. Emma, you matter more than any piece of land." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of hope. "I love you, Jacob Thornfield. I love you too, Emma. Whatever your last name ends up being." They spent the next hour copying the recording to multiple devices and calling Sheriff Mackenzie. By midnight, state police were involved, and by dawn, Richard Blackwood was in custody for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The contracts were declared invalid due to coercion and false pretenses. Emma's family's assets were frozen pending investigation, but the criminal charges were dropped in exchange for their cooperation with the fraud case. Standing on the porch as the sun rose over the mountains, Emma and Jacob watched the last police car disappear down the ranch road. "So," Jacob said, "what happens now? Now we figure out what our life looks like, together. Even with all the legal mess, the family drama, the uncertainty about your trust fund." Emma smiled, and Jacob realized it was the first truly free smile he'd seen from her, especially because of all that. "We'll build something that's ours, something no one can take away or manipulate or use against us. It won't be easy. The best things never are." Jacob looked out over his land, his family's legacy that he'd nearly lost, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Emma would face them together. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," Emma replied. "But let's make it official first. Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise to choose each other every day for the rest of our lives. Jacob kissed her as the sun climbed higher, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and possibility. In the distance, his cattle moved peacefully through the pasture, and somewhere in the house coffee was brewing. It was, Jacob thought, exactly what happiness was supposed to feel like. 6 months later, Emma Thornfield, the name made official by a simple ceremony at the courthouse in Billings, stood in the kitchen of the main house, watching steam rise from a pot of soup that would feed the crew working on the new horse barn. The kitchen had been transformed from a sparse, lonely space into the warm heart of a home that buzzed with activity and purpose. Through the window, she could see Jacob directing the construction crew with the easy confidence of a man who'd found his footing again. The broken arrow, Natai's ranch, was broken no longer. With the settlement money from Richard's criminal case and the restoration of Emma's trust fund, they'd not only saved the ranch but expanded it, adding sustainable practices and diversifying into heritage breed conservation. The irony wasn't lost on Emma that Richard's attempted manipulation had ultimately led to his own downfall and their financial freedom. His confession had revealed a pattern of business fraud spanning years, affecting multiple families across the Southwest. The class action lawsuit had resulted in substantial damages that allowed several families, including the Castellanos, to rebuild their lives on their own terms. "Smells incredible in here," a voice called from the doorway. Emma turned toward the sound, her face lighting up as she recognized the speaker. "Carmen, you made it!" Emma moved toward her mother, who stepped into the kitchen with the careful uncertainty of someone still learning how to navigate a new relationship. Carmen Castellanos had changed dramatically in the months since Richard's arrest. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly arranged hair, replaced by practical jeans and a simple sweater that suited her far better than the costume of wealth she'd worn for so many years. "I brought those photos you wanted," Carmen said, holding out an envelope. "Pictures of your grandmother, some from when you were little. I thought you might want them for the house." Emma accepted the envelope with genuine warmth. Her relationship with her parents remained complicated, marked by careful boundaries and gradual rebuilding of trust. But they were trying, all of them, to create something healthier than what had existed before. "How's Dad handling the new business?" Emma asked, leading her mother to the kitchen table. Carmen's smile was small but genuine. "Better than I expected. Turns out your father is actually quite good at running a boutique hotel when he's not being pressured to compete with corporate chains. The property in Santa Fe is thriving. The Castellanos family had emerged from Richard's financial manipulations bruised but not broken. They'd sold most of their hotel chain to pay debts and legal fees, keeping only the original property that had started the family business 3 generations ago. It was smaller, simpler, but it was truly theirs again. "And you? How are you adjusting to the new normal?" Carmen was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup Emma had placed in front of her. "It's strange, not worrying about profit margins and expansion plans every day, but good strange. I'm learning to garden, if you can believe that. Your father thinks I've lost my mind, but there's something peaceful about working with my hands." Emma reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. "I'm glad you're finding your way." "I'm trying to. We both are. Elena, Emma. I know I can't undo the choices I made, the ways I failed you. But I want you to know that seeing you here, seeing how happy you are, it helps me believe we might have done something right after all." Before Emma could respond, the kitchen door swung open to admit Jacob, followed by a tall woman with graying hair and the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. "Emma, I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Montana State Extension Service. Dr. Mitchell, this is my wife, Emma." Emma rose to shake hands, immediately liking the firm grip and direct gaze of the other woman. "Dr. Mitchell," Jacob mentioned you might be interested in our heritage breed program. Please call me Sarah, and yes, I'm very interested. What you and Jacob are doing here with rare cattle breeds and sustainable ranching practices is exactly the kind of innovation Montana agriculture needs. They spent the next hour touring the ranch, with Jacob and Emma explaining their vision for preserving endangered livestock breeds while maintaining profitable operations. The program had started with their existing cattle, but had expanded to include rare heritage chickens, sheep, and horses. The key, Emma explained as they walked through the expanded pastures, is that these heritage breeds aren't just museum pieces. They're genetically diverse animals that can thrive in conditions that would challenge modern industrial breeds. Sarah nodded approvingly. And you're documenting everything? Breeding records, health data, environmental impact? Emma's been meticulous. About that, Jacob said with obvious pride. She's created a database that tracks every animal, every breeding decision, every health intervention. Universities are already asking to use our data for research. The praise made Emma flush with pleasure. She'd discovered an unexpected aptitude for the scientific aspects of ranching, turning her business education toward agricultural innovation in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. As they completed the tour, Sarah pulled out a folder that made Jacob's eyes widen. I have a proposition for you both. The Extension Service has been awarded a federal grant to establish a Center of Excellence for Heritage Breed Conservation. We'd like to partner with the Broken Arrow Ranch as our primary demonstration facility. What would that mean? Emma asked. Though her excitement was already building, funding for expansion, access to university researchers, international recognition for your conservation work. Plus, you'd be training the next generation of sustainable ranchers. Jacob and Emma exchanged a look that spoke of shared dreams and growing possibilities. We'd need to think about it, Jacob said carefully. Of course. But Emma, I should mention, part of the program would involve you presenting your research at conferences, maybe even pursuing graduate studies in agricultural science. Your documentation methods are already attracting attention in academic circles. After Sarah left, Jacob and Emma found themselves alone on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. The view was the same one Jacob had stared at during his darkest moments, but everything else had changed. Academic conferences, Jacob mused. Dr. Emma Thornfield has a nice ring to it. It's overwhelming, Emma admitted. 6 months ago, I didn't even know who I was. Now people want me to teach others. You've always been a teacher. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for, that love doesn't have to be a business transaction, that running toward something is better than running away from it. Emma leaned against him, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Speaking of running toward things, there's something I need to tell you. Oh? She turned to face him, her expression serious but glowing with an inner light that made Jacob's breath catch. I went to see Dr. Morrison in town last week. Jacob felt a moment of concern. Is everything all right? Your vision? My vision is the same, still blind, probably permanently, but that's not why I went. Emma took his hands in hers, her smile widening. Jacob, I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a bolt of lightning. Pregnant, are you sure? Very sure. About 8 weeks along, Jacob swept her into his arms, spinning her around the porch while she laughed with delight. When he set her down, his face was streaked with tears. Emma, this is incredible. Are you happy? Are you scared? How are you feeling? All of the above, but mostly I'm excited. We're going to have a baby, Jacob, a little person who will grow up knowing they're wanted and loved and free to choose their own path. Jacob kissed her then, soft and reverent, as if she were made of precious metal. I love you, Mrs. Thornfield. I love you too. And I love the life we're building together. As if summoned by their joy, the kitchen door opened to reveal Carmen, who'd been giving them privacy to conduct their business tour. She took one look at their faces and gasped. Oh my goodness, are you... We're having a baby, Mom, Emma said, the word mom still feeling new but right on her tongue. Carmen's face crumpled with emotion as she pulled Emma into a fierce hug. I'm going to be a grandmother. Oh, sweetheart, this is wonderful news. You'll be a good grandmother, Emma said softly. You're learning to be the mother I needed. You'll be even better at being the grandmother this baby deserves. That evening, as Carmen drove back to town with promises to return soon, and help, however she could, Jacob and Emma sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge. The cattle had settled for the night, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. A baby, Jacob said wonderfully, still trying to process the news. A baby who'll grow up on this ranch, with these mountains and this sky. A baby who'll know that home isn't just a place. It's the people who love you unconditionally. What if we mess it up? What if we make the same mistakes our parents made? Emma took his hand, guiding it to rest on her still flat stomach. Then we'll learn from them and do better. That's what every generation tries to do, be better than the one before. The baby will need a college fund, and the ranch will need more infrastructure if we take the extension service partnership. And, Jacob, Emma interrupted gently, we'll figure it out. One day at a time, one challenge at a time. That's what we've been doing all along. He relaxed against her, marveling at her calm certainty. When did you become the wise one in this relationship? About the time I realized that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask better questions. They sat in comfortable silence, planning and dreaming about the future spreading out before them like the vast Montana sky. The baby would arrive in spring, just as the ranch was coming back to life after winter. There would be new calves in the pastures, new growth in the gardens, new possibilities emerging from the foundation they'd built together. Emma, Jacob said eventually, do you ever miss your old life? The money, the luxury, the certainty of having everything planned out. She considered the question seriously, as she did most things. I miss the security of knowing what was expected of me, but I don't miss the feeling of being trapped by other people's expectations. I don't miss feeling like my value was determined by my utility to someone else's plans. And now? Now I feel valuable because of who I am, not what I can do for others. I feel loved for my mind and my heart, not my breeding potential or my bank account. She squeezed his hand. Now I feel free. A shooting star streaked across the sky above them, bright and brief and beautiful. Emma couldn't see it, but she felt Jacob's sharp intake of breath and smiled. Make a wish, she whispered. I don't need to. Everything I could possibly want is already right here. Make one anyway, for the baby. Jacob closed his eyes and made a silent wish for health, for happiness, for the kind of love that would help their child grow up confident and kind and free to choose their own path through life. When he opened his eyes, Emma was smiling at him with the expression he'd come to treasure above all others, the look of a woman who'd found exactly where she belonged. What did you wish for? She asked. That our baby grows up knowing what real love looks like. That's a good wish. I think it's going to come true. As the night deepened around them, they made plans for the nursery they'd build in the main house. For the swing Jacob would hang from the old oak tree. For the stories they'd tell about how their child's parents found each other in a dust storm and chose love over everything else that the world offered. The Broken Arrow Ranch had been saved. But more than that, it had been transformed into something better than it had ever been before. Not just a working ranch, but a home where love was chosen daily, where challenges were faced together, and where the future was written by two people who'd learned that the best kind of success wasn't measured in dollars or acres, but in the depth of commitment and the quality of the life built side by side. Emma Thornfield, who'd once been a frightened woman running from an unwanted future, now stood ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that she'd chosen her life, her love, and her legacy with her whole heart. And Jacob Thornfield, who'd once been a man with nothing left to lose, had found that when you opened your heart to love, you gained everything that truly mattered. Under the vast Montana sky, with their baby growing quietly between them and their future stretching out like an endless horizon, they knew they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for without even knowing they were looking. They'd found home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.